Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Michelle Fondinauthor and I'm the author of The Wheel of Healing with Ayurveda, an easy guide to a healthy lifestyle. We are going to talk about healthy relationships today. We're going to talk about healing relationships, and we're going to talk about a topic that is really personal, and also in what I hear in a lot of earth angels or really sensitive people or awakened individuals, if you will, why we tend to stay in abusive relationships. And this is so important. This actually came to me in a channeling yesterday, as most of my videos do. And I think about this stuff, but it's mostly that the more I am aligned with spirit, the more I'm aligned with these teachings, the more that tends to come to me. And I, in turn, share these teachings with you via YouTube and also in my writing too. And in fact, I am in the midst of preparing to write 2 books. One was a work in progress that I had not yet finished. And the second one has been a work in progress in spirit, but not yet on paper or computer or word processing, whatever you want to call it. So in one of my last videos, it was in the Twin Flame series. I'm going to pop this in the Twin Flame series, but I'm also going to put it in the playlist on spiritual growth and spiritual awakening. And so if you are in the midst of going through a spiritual awakening or spiritual growth, I would say take a look at all of the videos that I do on spiritual awakening, because there is a progression and there are different channeled messages that are super important for your spiritual awakening in order to feel like you're not lost in this process. So in the past several months, my videos have been more focused on relationship. And so I mentioned that in my previous video, I did mention something about being in a series throughout my adult life and also teenage life as well, being in a series of codependent relationships. And so if you have ever viewed any of my videos on alcoholism, addiction, and recovery, or you've viewed my videos on relationships, you'll get the gist of what codependency is. Codependency is when love is not free. Codependency is when love is conditional. Codependency is more ego-based. It's if I do this, you do this. If I'm like this, you're like this. So it's very much what our relationships today tend to look like. And in particular, when it focuses on abusive relationships, and when I talk about abuse, I'm talking about not only physical abuse, but a lot of times I'm more focused on emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and things that are happening in your day-to-day life where the relationship is not healthy. And that can include a relationship with addictions and someone who is dependent on a substance to survive, and then you may or may not be included in that, or you might be the counterpart to that addiction. But it doesn't have to be addiction. It could be someone who's like addicted to work and they're keeping you as someone who's codependent on them because of finances. It could be someone who you think is kind of out of your league, if you will. And so they're keeping you codependent on them because you think that they're better than you. So it could be a lot of different configurations of this codependency, but let's just focus now on your spiritual awakening and your areas of sensitivity to being loving, to be unconditionally loving, and also to being compassionate and empathetic toward others, which those of us that are on a spiritual path and we're really open to being that source of light for others. And especially if you were naturally sensitive and in the codependent relationship, you tended to be more of, I don't like to use this word, I'm gonna use it very gingerly, more of the victim in the relationship, meaning like you were the one trying to make everything work. As I said to one of my previous clients just recently, you were the glue constantly holding the relationship together. Now, that does not mean that you are without fault, and I'm going to outline why this is. And it doesn't mean that you are doing anything bad It just means that you were keeping yourself in this holding pattern of an abusive or codependent relationship. And so there were some things that you were actually doing to keep yourself in it rather than taking yourself out of it. And so in my case, being in a series of codependent relationships, I seriously did not know any different. I had been raised in a very dysfunctional household in which both parents happened to be in codependent relationships, or even my mom, who was in codependent relationships early on and then stopped dating. She kind of held on to this codependent relationship with my father, kind of like a ghost from the past, kind of like memories from the past, that ghost from the past. And then my father had been through a series of codependent relationships with the women that he was in relationships with. So I never really had a whole lot of good role models. And then, of course, me, myself, having a codependent relationship with my parents, then in addition to that, I sought out partners, and this is never a conscious effort. It's not like you seek out partners consciously and you go, I'm going to pick this codependent relationship to have a lot of strife in my relationships. It's usually something very subconscious because it's something you're comfortable with. It's something that you're used to. So there's a level of comfort there. And so a lot of times you have to work really, really, really hard to get out of it. So as you are going through your spiritual awakening and becoming more of a loving person and a more of a compassionate and empathetic person, you may have a tendency, and I hear this all the time, you may have a tendency to want to put yourself or keep yourself in situations that are not healthy. And so becoming spiritually awakened does not mean lack of discernment. And that is one of our focuses now in this video and throughout any series that I'm going to talk about on spiritual awakening and on having healthy relationships. So first and foremost, you must have a healthy relationship with yourself. And so that is what discernment is about. And in previous videos, look up Michelle Fondinauthor boundaries, because in previous videos, I've talked about setting boundaries, like setting boundaries with your alcoholic, if you are in an alcoholic relationship, but setting boundaries just in relationships in general. I mean, it's a general rule. But part of that is just discernment. Discernment is not selfish. It can seem like discernment is a judgment. It can seem like discernment is self-centered or selfish, and it's not being loving. But discernment and proper discernment in relationships is just loving yourself first. And really, you need to love yourself first, fully and wholeheartedly, and be compassionate and empathetic towards yourself first, if you are going to enter into healthy relationships. The person who's becoming spiritually awakened, oftentimes they get into this space, and I talked about this in my last video, but they get into this space of spiritual egotism. In this space of spiritual egotism, you think that somehow you have got the answers. And I'm not saying this maliciously. I'm not saying like this is a malicious attempt at you becoming spiritually superior to everybody else in your life, because often that's not the case. Often it's because you seriously do see the light. You seriously do see the truth. You've glimpsed into unconditional love. You've glimpsed into the lightness of being. And then you try to bring that back down into regular life. And then it totally blows up in your face, because most people are not ready to see that. Most people are not ready to receive that, nor are they ready to give that back. So when you enter into this space of spiritual egotism where you're like, okay, I am the light and I am love. I am everything that is empathetic, compassionate, loving, and kind. And I'm going to go into each relationship that is existing now, and I'm going to apply those rules. Here's the thing. If you are in a codependent or abusive relationship, whether that be physically abusive, emotionally abusive, psychologically abusive, or you're in a relationship with someone who is more ego-based centered or narcissistic, any loving action that you do in those relationships, we're talking about those specific relationships, any loving action that you do, or when you're compassionate, kind, and unconditionally loving, that person who is not ready to see that, they're totally not ready to see that. They're going to A, get super angry with you because they can't reflect back the love that you're giving freely. Or B, they're going to take advantage of the situation because that is the only thing they know how to do in a codependent relationship. In a codependent relationship, they're going to take everything from you that is good, kind of like a leech sucking onto you, because they don't know how to perceive that goodness within themselves. They don't have the self-love, they don't have the self-recognition, and they don't have the self-awareness to be able to recognize the goodness and love and compassion within them. Therefore, they're going to try to take it away from you without giving anything in return, or giving abuse in return. When you go back from your awakened state into these abusive type relationships, just know that you are kind of immersing yourself in the fire, falsely believing, falsely thinking that you are in a position to change them. And so that's where the responsibility of your part of the relationship comes in. You must, in that type of relationship, be responsible to yourself and be responsible in the relationship to know that when someone is not in that space that you are in, by being a loving, compassionate, giving person who is not focused on ego-centeredness, that there is nothing you can do to change them. They have to have that awakened state by themselves. Normally, it's going to happen without you. So if you falsely believe that by your light of being that you're just going to walk into the room and they're going to be transformed, that's your own spiritual egotism speaking, because that's typically not what happens. And then you're putting yourself back into an abusive situation. You're putting yourself back into a situation where you are going to be used and you are going to be mistreated just because you think that somehow by your light you can change them. So that's on you. And what you must realize is that to really treat your inner child with kindness. So let me just give you an example. So let's say you have a small child, a child that's 5, 6, or 7 years old, and this child goes to school. You send this child off to school, and this child is constantly being teased by another child who is 5, 6, 7 years old. And they come home crying to you every day saying, you know, this kid, he won't stop teasing me, or she won't stop teasing me, and I just can't handle it. Every single day it's the same thing. Like, I'm just trying to do my own thing and they just keep teasing me. So in that event, you might counsel your child, your son or daughter, to maybe go tell the teacher, or maybe you yourself would come forth and notify the teacher that your child is constantly being picked on. And then if that matter continues, you might turn to that other child's parents and get the parents involved. And if the parents don't turn it around, then you would advise, as a loving parent, you would advise your child, well, do the best you can to stay away from this kid if they're going to continue to tease you and bully you. You're not going to say, you are the light of being, you are an angelic figure. Get yourself back out there in the schoolyard and go put yourself in that situation and face that person face to face. You wouldn't say that to that child. You would tell the child to turn the other way. Go find some other friends, stay with a group. There's power in numbers. Like, what good parent would advise their child to go face the bully face to face, and just by loving kindness and compassion and empathy, that child will turn around? So you wouldn't do that. You would protect that child. You would want that child to have the best experience possible in school and not be with another kid who's not ready to be kind, loving, and compassionate. So do you see how ridiculous it almost sounds to pretend that because you're awakened, pretend that because like you are loving, that it's okay to put yourself back into those relationships and those situations that are no longer serving you. You might be wondering, like, okay, so if I am awakened and if I am a compassionate, loving, and kind person, and I see someone who is not that way, So they're just, ego-centered, ego-based, like I said, maybe abusive, narcissistic. So you see these people in your life. Now they could come disguised as boyfriends, girlfriends, work colleagues, somebody at the supermarket. They could come disguised as like a driver on the road. They could come disguised as a friend or as a parent or as a brother or sister. And so you might be saying like, well, if I am in this space, if I am in this space of love and I'm not being loving toward them, like I'm not showing them my love by relationship, by interaction with them, then how is that being loving? How is that being kind? How is that being compassionate? Okay, there's a difference here. There's a difference between having discernment as to who you're going to let into your personal space. And this goes in any social situation, including at home. So if you have decided through your spiritual awakening and through proper discernment to love yourself first, that being in that home situation is not beneficial to yourself, then it's time to get up and leave. It's time to get up and go. It's time to pack your things and take any minor children with you and go. What it means to be loving, compassionate, kind, and holding that space of love for others, even when you have proper discernment that it's not okay to be in their space, is to withhold the judgment of bad words, of unkind words, of talking or gossiping about them behind their back, of yelling, screaming, or saying unkind things to them. Those are the types of things that you can do in the midst of becoming healthier as a person, as a whole, becoming a healthier person in yourself, and not perpetuating the hate, not perpetuating the codependency, not perpetuating the abuse. So do you see the difference? The difference is protecting yourself, taking care of yourself, getting yourself out of a space where there are people that are no longer serving you. And if this means like changing states or changing jobs or changing relationships, or not seeing your family because all of them are codependent and abusive, so be it. Like, so be it. But for you to remain in your awakened and loving space, it's not your job to condemn them. It's not your job to, like I said, gossip, talk about them behind their back, or yell or scream at them, or cause them more pain. Because one thing you need to realize is that a person who is acting in that way, they're going through a lot of pain themselves. And as I mentioned, they can't even see the light within them. Like if someone is treating you as such, or if someone is being ego-centered and only thinking of themselves, it's because they cannot see their inner light. And they're immersed in pain. Someone who can't see their inner light, they're immersed in darkness. They're immersed in their own pain. And so by being the loving person that you are, it's your job to hold that space for them. It's in far away, right? But it's your job to not add to their pain. In that way, you can be a loving person. But remember, be the loving person to yourself first. Be the loving person to your inner child first. And please, if you really, truly still are under the false pretense that by your spiritual awakening and by your spiritual being, that the presence of you is what is going to heal them, just know that it's never okay to stay in an abusive situation, and that includes any of the abuses that I mentioned above, as well as neglect, as well as being in relationships where the other person is immersed in addiction, whether that be alcohol or drugs, or some other really form of unhealthy addiction where they are reliant on you and it's keeping you in this codependent pattern. Just know that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to leave. And as painful as that sounds, and as hard as that sounds, and as awful as that sounds sometimes for some of you, just know that that is the most loving thing that you can do, and that is the way you can show your light. And it doesn't have to be an exit with a ton of drama. It doesn't have to be an exit with, throwing things and tears and unkind words. But it can just be a gracious exit in protecting yourself and having that proper discernment. And once you start having that proper discernment, you're well on your way to healthier relationships. And yeah, that person might transform. And I'm always a big proponent of, if someone is very sincere about changing, is giving them a second chance. But you need to make sure that those efforts to change are sincere. And usually those are just seen through the test of time. You're not going to see it right away. It's not going to be an overnight thing. It's going to be something that you see through constant and never-ending changes, meaning like they are continually trying to improve themselves in a program, in a 12-step program, through therapy, maybe they need medication, whatever the case may be, but you can see that clearly. And just know that proper discernment is not judgment. Know that looking out for yourself in a loving and compassionate way first is not selfish. And so I just wanted to wish you that, guys. I wanted to wish you the highest light and love, and to know that it's okay to take care of yourself. It's okay to love yourself, and it's okay to look out for yourself, even if it seems like you're being unkind, because you're really not being unkind. Like I said, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is just stay away from people who are unkind, who are not open to becoming better people. And when you allow them the space by leaving their space, you create a void for them. And when you create that void, usually they're better able to deal with their own stuff, and they have a better chance of becoming enlightened. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for subscribing to my channel below. And please click on the bell button for notifications of all my future videos. Share this video with family and friends, and thank you for pledging your support on Patreon, www.patreon.com/Michelle S. Fondin, and I will see you in the next video.